Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met his Iranian and Russian counterparts Hassan Rouhani and Vladimir Putin in the Black Sea resort of Sochi on Tuesday.
The leaders agreed on holding a Syrian People's Congress to find a permanent solution to the Syria crisis. In a joint statement, the three leaders called on the Syrian government and moderate opposition to participate constructively in the planned Congress, to be held in the same city on a date they did not specify. The Congress will look at the key questions on Syria's national agenda, Putin told reporters at the summit, sitting alongside Rouhani and Erdogan. First of all, the task is to establish the framework for the future structure of state, the adoption of a new constitution, and, on the basis of that, the holding of elections under United Nations supervision, Putin said. President Erdogan added that we, as three countries, will decide on who will be invited to the Congress. Subcommissions established by our foreign ministries will make the necessary studies beforehand. Yet, there was no word from the leaders on who would be invited. The list of invitees has been a sticking point, with Turkey objecting to some Syrian Kurdish groups attending. Following the meeting, President Erdogan told the reporters that Turkey's position on terrorist organizations such as the YPG and PYD is clear. Erdogan also suggested that Putin shares our sensitivity about the PYD and YPG, and the Assad regime also objects to the possibility of such an entity as far as we can see. Yet the officials of Iran and Russia stated that all groups would be invited to the meeting, making no further comment on the Kurdish groups. Meanwhile, Butania Shaban, a senior advisor to President Bashar Assad, told the reporters that the success of the Congress depends on the various opposition groups realizing that the time has come to stop the violence, lay down their weapons, and engage in a national dialogue.
Joining us from Moscow, Russia, to talk about the Sochi Summit and Turkey's role in the future of Syria is Kerim Has, who is a lecturer at Moscow State University. Good evening, Mr. Has.
Hello, nice to be here.
So Tuesday's historic summit, the meeting between Erdogan, Rouhani and Putin in Sochi, was preceded by another meeting that took place between the Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad and Russian President Vladimir Putin. And it seems impossible to think of these meetings as separate encounters. So was this really a tripartite summit, in your opinion? How should we make sense of the preceding meeting between Putin and Assad?
Actually, I also agree with the fact that it was not a tripartite summit, but it was a quartet summit. I also agree with this opinion. And if you look at the meeting, actually, we can see that during the meeting, there was a need for Kremlin to support to show its support to the Assad regime in the political settlement process, in the post-conflict Syria process, actually. So in that sense, I think the interest of the regime in the transitional period also would be discussed in the Sochi meeting between the three-party meeting between the three leaders of Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And in that sense, it was a need to show its support for Assad regime in the near future, and also to harmonize the claims or to harmonize the claims of the regime and interests of the regime in the new post-conflict Syria. I think in that sense, it is important to conclude that, as you know, 2 years ago, the last meeting between Putin and Assad was happened. But at that time, the military operation of Russia was discussed between the two presidents. But during the last meeting, I think the main issue was the political settlement of the Syrian statehood in the new period. And also to, as I said, to harmonize, to talk about the concessions and compromises between the regime and the key players in the region, between Turkey, Iran, and Russia. So in that sense, we can say that it was a quartet summit, sure, but on the other hand, it was a talk of a bargaining process.
Mr. Has, taking into account that this summit in Sochi was preceded by further meetings between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Egyptian, Saudi, and Israeli counterparts, would it be appropriate, in your opinion, to say that Russia, Putin, to be more specific, now holds the only viable initiative to a possible solution in Syria?
Of course, the peace process in the Syrian crisis is a long way yet. However, we can say that Moscow wants to take the leading role in this peace process. It is true, and this initiative is also because of that reason, the meeting initiative, and also the upcoming meeting of the opposition groups and the regime in Sochi. Maybe in the early December it will be organized. A conference will be organized in Sochi also. So we can say that it is sure that Moscow and its allies won the war in Syria. But for peace, for a permanent peace in Syria, Moscow also is well aware of the fact that it needs to talk with all the shareholders, stakeholders in the Syrian crisis, not only with Turkey and Iran, but also with the other actors, as you said, with the United States, first of all, with the Saudi Arabia, with Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, and so on, Egypt and the other actors, also Israel. So in that sense, as you already mentioned, Putin had a diplomatic marathon ahead of the meeting with the Iranian and Turkish counterparts, and wants to have a leading role in the Syrian statehood in the post-conflict period, I think.
Let's now talk a bit about the Syrian National Dialogue Congress, which was announced as an outcome of this summit. It's not yet, it's scheduled to take place, but it's not yet announced when that will be, although we know that that will also be in Sochi soon. It was announced that Moscow, Ankara and Tehran will have to decide upon the participants of this conference, and it's known that Turkey is strictly opposed to the participation of the Kurdish group PYD. So do you think in the end PYD will have a place in this Congress?
I think, first of all, we should understand the meaning of the Sochi meeting, because, first of all, we need to know that in the Geneva platform, as you know, there was an opposition in exile with negotiations with the regime. But on the other hand, in the Astana process, in the Astana platform, we saw a much more direct talk between the military opposition and the regime, and under the guaranteeship of Turkey, Iran, and Russia. So Sochi, in that sense, it was a strategic pause for all the actors. But on the other hand, we know that not all the interests of these three guarantor countries are overlapping. And the first main problem here is the Kurdish issue and the PYD issue, and the PYD that Turkey recognizes as a terrorist organization. So in that sense, I think in Sochi, the counterparts also couldn't find a common point, common consensus for the Kurdish issue, and still couldn't agree with on one project about participation of PYD into the Congress. But on the other hand, we know that for Russia, the PYD issue is sensitive, and Kurdish issue actually is sensitive for Russia. First of all, Russia wants to solve the Kurdish issue in Syria with political means, not militarily, as sometimes Turkish political leadership insists on. And the second one is for Russia here is that Russia doesn't want to leave the Kurds in the region totally to the United States, but also we know that Russia couldn't persuade the Turkish political leadership in that sense. But on the other hand, we will see in the process, I think PYD, maybe Russia can invite the PYD group under the delegation, under a regime delegation, or better to say that maybe the Assad regime can form a new delegation for the Congress that will be organized in the early of December, with also defending the interests of the Kurds in the region. In that sense, I think in the following days you can see such kind of a new rhetoric from the Syrian government that the Syrian statehood will gain such kind of a decentralization in the post-conflict period, or such kind of a federation. As you know, Russia in the beginning of this year has proposed a new constitution for Syria at that time, and Moscow has proposed a federation for Syria, actually, a cultural autonomy for Kurds. But in that sense, the administrational, especially, and the political rights of the Kurds, I think, will be defended under the regime delegation in the upcoming Sochi meeting, upcoming Sochi Congress, National Dialogue Congress, between regime and the opposition groups. And also we know that the PYD and the other Kurdish groups never, during the Syrian crisis, actually never have become an opponent of the Assad regime. So in that sense, I think it seems me logical that regime can defend the interests of the Kurds in the upcoming Sochi meeting. And also I want to remind you that, as you remember, the Russian proposal for the new constitution included a renewal of the Syrian state, renewal of the name of the Syrian state, and Russia had proposed at that time to rename the Syria as a Syrian Republic of Syria, not Syrian Arab Republic of Syria or Syrian Arab Republic. So in that sense, I think the ethnical issue, the ethnical stress will be a bit much more softened in the new Syrian statehood, according to Russia. And in that sense, I think that can be opened an opportunity to find a common point with Turkish counterparts for Russia.
Mr. Has, my final question to you is, to what extent do you think Turkey's attitude and sensitivities will play a role in shaping Syria's future? In other words, what role does Turkey have in the future of Syria?
It is sure that Turkey will play a crucial role in the new Syria, in the reconstruction of the Syrian state in the new era. But on the other hand, Turkey needs to overcome the threat perception on the Kurdish issue in general, not only in Syria, and develop a new regional Kurdish policy for the region, for the Middle East. Of course, I think in the short term, we shouldn't expect that Turkish political leadership will rethink or will renew its position on the PYD. But on the other hand, there is not so many other choices to persuade either to persuade the United States and Russia on that issue, or to have a say on the PYD or in Kurdish issue, that it will be solved in the internal dynamics of the Syrian state. So in that sense, I think the regime, if the regime and the Kurds and the PYD also can develop a new formation for a delegation, a new delegation for the Congress, for the upcoming Congress, I think Turkey will not react so much to that formulation. So in that sense, it will be important for Turkey that how it will act in the following weeks that Russia will formulate. So we will see.
Mr. Has, thank you very much for your comments and for joining us tonight.
Thank you also.
The first hearing of the Reza Zarrab case was rescheduled to December 4th after a judge postponed the jury selection in the trial.
The case involving the Iranian-Turkish gold trader Reza Zarrab has further heated up Turkish politics and tensed the ties between the US and Turkey once again. The postponement by a week of a New York court case regarding Zarrab has sparked reactions from Ankara amid the alleged involvement of the ruling AKP officials in the criminal activities Zarrab is accused of. The trial and jury selection are adjourned for 1 week and will commence on Monday, November 27th, the New York court declared on Monday. Once the jury is selected, we will immediately proceed to openings and witness testimony, it added. In reaction to the court's decision, Ankara repeated its claim that there is a plot against Turkey. It's not just President Erdogan, said ruling AKP spokesman Bekir Bozdağ. It's a grand plot against Turkey, he claimed. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan also repeated on Tuesday his belief that the US case against Zarrab is evidence that the Fethullahist terrorist organization's December 17th and 25th attacks against Turkey have now extended to the US. The United States, on the other hand, has called the Turkish government's accusations of a plot in the case of Reza Zarrab ridiculous. We have heard that story, that old same song and dance from Turkey before, and I would have to give you the same answer as last time they accused us of trying to foment some sort of a coup. And I would say that is ridiculous. We are not engaged in that. Anything related to that particular case, I would just have to refer you to the Department of Justice. State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert said during a daily press briefing on Tuesday. On the other hand, recent developments concerning the Zarrab case and mutual statements between the US and Turkey impacted the Turkish lira significantly. The dollar rose to 3.97 against the lira on Tuesday and hit an all-time record.
Turkey withdrew its soldiers from NATO's Trident Javelin exercise in Norway after a civilian official depicted President Erdogan as an enemy collaborator.
Last weekend, Turkey withdrew its 40 soldiers from NATO's Trident Javelin exercise in Norway after a civilian Norwegian official depicted President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as an enemy collaborator. A portrait of Turkey's founder Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was also shown in the hostile leader list during a computer-assisted exercise of the drill. Government spokesperson Bekir Bozdağ depicted the incident as one of the biggest scandals in NATO's history, speaking to the reporters. He said on Monday that NATO should conduct a broad investigation, including into higher officials, over the targeting of Atatürk and Erdogan. All aspects of the incident should be revealed and those responsible should be determined if there are higher generals among them, Bozdağ added. President Erdogan also reacted sharply to the incident. Erdogan said, "You have witnessed the impudence at NATO exercises in Norway. There are some mistakes that cannot be committed by fools but only by vile people. They placed Atatürk and me on a stand with targets during NATO exercises and provoked a scandal. This question is not personal or party related. The targets were Turkey and the Turkish people. There can be no alliance like that. This matter cannot be covered over with a simple apology," Erdogan added. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg apologized over the phone to President Erdogan. The NATO chief has reassured Turkey that the incident would not happen again. "I am now also looking into the procedures to make sure that something like this not to happen again," he said. The NATO chief also said Turkey was an important ally for NATO, adding that Turkey is contributing to the alliance in many different ways in the fight against terrorism bordering Iraq and Syria. "So we highly value the contributions of Turkey to the alliance, and therefore we have to make sure that instances like this don't occur again," Stoltenberg said. Stoltenberg also added that the Norwegian national, who was allegedly behind the incident, was removed from the exercise.
The governorship of Ankara has banned all LGBT events in the city until further notice.
The governorship of Ankara has banned all events by lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and intersex rights groups in the city last week. The governor's office claimed such events may cause animosity between different groups and endanger health and morality, as well as the rights and freedoms of others. Starting from November 18th, considering public sensitivities, any events such as LGBT, cinema, theater performances, panels, interviews, and exhibitions are banned until further notice in our province in order to provide peace and security, the Ankara Governor's Office stated on Sunday. It has been found out from various social media and some written and visual media organs that a number of activities of cinema, theater, panel, interview, exhibition, etc. were planned in different parts of our province by various NGOs under the name of LGBTT as well as LGBTI, the statement added. A part of society with different qualities in terms of social class, race, religion, sect, or region could therefore explicitly incite another part of the society to grudges and enmity, posing an open and imminent danger in terms of public safety, the statement also said.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Sponsored by the French Culture Center, the XXF Very Very French Festival kicked off yesterday with an Amadou Mariam concert in Babylon. Cartel and Cezayir, two of the dazzling the French electronic musicians many names, will take the stage tonight. Eric Truffaz, one of the leading names in the European jazz scene, will once again go on stage in Babylon tomorrow night. The French trumpet player has performed jointly with musicians from various countries and musical movements such as İlhan Erşahin, Hüsnü Şenlendirici and Philip Garcia. To date, Truffaz has released countless albums under prominent record labels like Blue Note, and he is the recipient of France's prestigious Prix Spécial Jazz Award. The 21st Istanbul Theatre Festival, organized by the Istanbul Foundation for Culture and Arts, continues. Today, Panopticon will be performed with two shows at Yunus Emre Cultural Center's Turhan Tuzcu Stage, Farfal at Zorlu Performance Arts Center Studio with two shows, All About the Heart at Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University's Bomonti Campus, and Yalnız at Zorlu PSM Drama Stage. On November 25th, All About the Heart, Seul, and with three shows, this time Farfal will meet theater lovers in the same venues. Home will be performed at Enka İbrahim Betil Auditorium. Victoria Over the Sun and I Love You Turkey will be performed at Yunus Emre Culture Center and Betrayal at Caddebostan Culture Center.
Arkadaşlar bugün size Chubby Bunny Challenge videosu çekeceğiz.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.